You ever have a neighbor so obsessed with your property, you start wondering if they secretly live there? Because that's what it felt like with Martha. If you've ever dealt with a Karen, the kind that treats your front lawn like it's her personal crusade, you already know the script. But nothing prepared me for what she pulled. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and like the video. You won't want to miss how this ends. Let me rewind. I moved into the house on Blakewood Drive about 8 months ago. Small place, detached garage, needed some work, but it was mine. A fixer-upper I could finally call home after years of apartment noise and shared walls. I'd barely finished unloading the last box when she appeared. "Excuse me," she called out from the sidewalk, holding a clipboard like she was on some official mission. "Just so you know, garbage collection is Thursdays only. We don't leave bins on the curb past noon. It attracts raccoons." I blinked. "Okay, good to know." She didn't introduce herself, didn't welcome me to the neighborhood, just pivoted on her heel and marched off like she'd delivered a court summons. That was my first encounter with Martha. I didn't know her name yet, only that she wore tennis skirts and orthopedic shoes and seemed to materialize out of nowhere whenever someone in the cul-de-sac broke one of her imaginary rules. No one liked her. That much was obvious. But everyone tolerated her like a bad smell in a room with no windows. At first, I tried to play nice. I waved when I saw her. I moved the garbage bin. I even trimmed the little patch of grass that grew around the base of my mailbox just to avoid conflict. But with Martha, appeasement doesn't work. It invites escalation. By the second week, she left a typed note taped to my front door about the unauthorized color of my front porch light. It was a warm LED, the kind you get at Home Depot in bulk. Then came the wind chimes. "Noise ordinance violation," she snapped one morning, pointing to the small bamboo chime hanging from the eave. "That thing echoes through the entire block." I took it down. Again. I didn't want trouble, but things started to get weirder. She began walking by my house 3 or 4 times a day. Once I caught her taking pictures of my side yard. Another time, I heard her telling a delivery guy that I was under HOA review, even though there was no formal HOA board. Turns out, she just printed some letterhead and claimed she was acting interim president. My friends laughed when I told them, said I was overreacting, but they didn't have to live next to her. Then about a month ago, I noticed something strange. Every time I opened the garage, something had been moved. Once it was the rake I'd left propped against the back wall. Another time, a bucket of car wash supplies was shifted a few feet over. Nothing major, but enough to feel off, like someone had been inside. I checked the side door. The lock was flimsy, the kind you twist with a coin if you really want to. I replaced it the next day with a deadbolt and ordered a motion camera online. A week later, the footage confirmed it. Martha had tried the side door. In broad daylight, just walked up, looked around, twisted the knob, and when it didn't budge, casually walked off like she was on a stroll. That's when I stopped laughing. I called my buddy Kyle, ex-sheriff's deputy, now working private security. Told him what was happening. He didn't hesitate. "You want company?" he asked. "I want this to end." That's when the idea started forming. I wouldn't confront her, wouldn't call the police. Not yet. I'd set the scene. Let her walk into it on her own, and when she did, she'd find more than she bargained for, because Martha had made one mistake too many, and this time, I was ready. The camera footage was damning, but not enough to press charges. Not yet. Kyle told me what I already knew. Unless she actually entered, I couldn't do much. But that didn't mean I had to sit on my hands. I upgraded all the locks, put up a second camera angled at the driveway, ordered a sensor light with a blinding 3,000 lumen flood effect. My garage, which had been a dusty tool storage zone, suddenly became a small fortress. I even cleaned the inside, swept the floor, organized shelves. It wasn't paranoia, it was prep, because I knew she'd try again. The weird thing was, the more precautions I took, the more obvious it became that Martha wanted me to notice her, like she was testing me. One afternoon, I watched her stand at the edge of my driveway for a full 3 minutes, just staring. When I opened the window and asked if she needed anything, she smiled and walked away. 2 days later, I got another letter. No envelope, just a folded printout shoved under the mat. Unregistered pest issue. It claimed my garage was a rodent hazard based on visible droppings and that the HOA Pest Control Compliance Office would be conducting an inspection within the next 10 business days. It was signed Martha Ellison, Acting HOA Environmental Officer. It was laughable. I didn't even have rats. But the bold part? She'd actually created a stamp, red ink, circular seal, and pressed it under her signature like she was the freaking Department of Agriculture. I texted Kyle a photo. He just replied, "She's escalating." The next day I talked to my neighbors. Turns out I wasn't Martha's first target. Lena, who lived across the street, said Martha once called animal control because Lena's cat was too aggressive. It had meowed loudly during her evening walk. A couple down the block had replaced their porch railing and got threatened with HOA architectural violation notices. Again, totally fake. But the most telling story came from Mr. Henderson, an old-timer who'd been on Blakewood since the 70s. She tried to walk into my backyard once, he told me. Said she was checking for unlicensed sheds. I told her I'd call the cops. She never came back. That was it. The pattern. She poked until someone snapped. Then she backed off and moved on. Only this time, she was dealing with someone who'd worked in law enforcement for 6 years. So I made a plan. The bait was simple. An open inspection notice I'd taped to my garage door. It looked like I was complying. I used her format, same font, red ink, but I added a line. Private appointment scheduled with HOA deputy for verification. Do not enter alone. I knew she'd take that as a challenge. That weekend, I invited Kyle and 2 of his friends. Both off-duty deputies I knew from the old days. They came over in plain clothes but had their badges clipped invisible. No weapons. No confrontation, just presence. We set up chairs in the back of the garage, left the door shut but unlocked, camera recording, lights off, and we waited. First hour? Nothing. Second hour? Still quiet, apart from the sound of a leaf blower 3 houses down. Then just after 3:40 p.m., the side gate creaked. I held up a hand. Don't move. The door handle jiggled. We heard a pause. Then slowly, it opened. Flashlight beam cut through the darkness. A clipboard appeared, then a gloved hand, then Martha. She stepped in like she was entering a crime scene, shining her light along the floor, muttering under her breath, something about droppings and compliance failure. Then her beam landed on us. 4 chairs, 3 grown men, one holding a coffee, another mid-bite of a protein bar, all silent, all staring. She froze, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Kyle stood up first. Calm, measured. "Ma'am," he said, "can you explain why you're in this man's garage without permission?" She blinked, stared at the badges, at the camera blinking red in the corner. I'm conducting a routine HOA pest inspection," she stammered, holding up her clipboard like it was a shield. "This neighborhood doesn't have an active HOA," one of the deputies replied. "And even if it did, you don't have the right to enter private property." Her face went crimson, then pale, then crimson again. "I do have authority. I've been handling these inspections for years. There are mice, and I was invited." I stood then. "No, Martha," I said. "You weren't, and you're being recorded." She spun toward me. "This is harassment. I'm trying to protect the neighborhood." Kyle stepped forward, just enough to close the space. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you need to leave, right now, or we will have to involve on-duty officers. You've broken the law today. How far this goes depends on what you do next." She didn't answer, just turned on her heel and bolted. Actually bolted, out the side door. No one said a word for a full minute. Then one of the deputies let out a low whistle. Damn! We didn't celebrate. Not yet, because now came the second part, making it count. When Martha fled the garage, she left more than just her dignity behind. She left her clipboard. I picked it up like it was radioactive. Kyle chuckled and said, "Might want to glove up. That thing probably has more lies than a used car ad." But what we found inside turned the situation from crazy to surreal. There were printed violation notices for almost every house on the street, most of them dated for upcoming weeks. She had planned inspections of sheds, patios, even interior windows. None of it had any legal basis, but she was dead serious. There were pages of what looked like personal notes, observations on when people left their homes, license plate numbers, even sketches of backyard layouts. We all stared at the papers in silence. "Is this enough?" I asked. Kyle nodded slowly. "Oh yeah, this is way beyond petty harassment." I scanned and backed up every page, sent copies to Kyle and the others, then called Lena across the street and filled her in. She asked to see the clipboard. I showed her. Her face darkened. "She's been writing about my kids?" she whispered. "That's it. I'm calling the police." By the end of the day, 5 other neighbors had copies of Martha's inspection notes, and every one of them was ready to take action. We didn't have to wait long. The following Monday, a uniformed officer knocked on my door. He was polite, but firm. "Sir, we're responding to a complaint filed by a Miss Martha Ellison," he said. "She alleges that you and 3 unidentified males detained her unlawfully inside your garage." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Officer, would you like to see the footage?" 10 minutes later, he was sitting in my living room, eyes narrowed at the screen as Martha's flashlight beam swept over the garage and caught all 4 of us sitting there like some suburban firing squad. "She walked in on her own," I explained. "No confrontation, no threats, and the door was never locked. She entered without permission, carrying her little badge of delusion." The officer didn't say much, just jotted notes and asked for copies of the video and documents. I handed him a USB drive and one of the scanned clipboards. "She's been monitoring the entire block," I added. "People are ready to file harassment reports." He nodded. "Thanks for your cooperation." Less than 2 hours later, a patrol car pulled into Martha's driveway. She came outside in a robe and slippers, arguing before the officer even got out of the car. Hands waving, voice rising. I couldn't hear what was said, but it didn't matter. By then, the neighborhood had gathered, not openly, not in a circle or anything, but windows were open, curtains shifted, lawnmowers suddenly turned off. It was that kind of moment. No one said it, but everyone knew something had finally snapped. The next morning, a letter showed up in everyone's mailbox, not from Martha this time, from the city. "Unauthorized impersonation of HOA authority is under investigation. Residents are advised to report any unpermitted inspections or unauthorized entry attempts to local authorities." The effect was instant. By noon, a group of neighbors filed formal complaints. Lena. The couple with the porch railing, Mr. Henderson. Me. It was like watching a dam break. 2 days later, Martha's house went quiet. No walks, no binoculars, no clipboard. I didn't think she'd give up that easy, but for a moment, it was like she had vanished. Until Friday. A heavy cream-colored envelope arrived. No stamp. Hand-delivered. Inside was a letter. Not typed, not signed with her usual fake title. Just cursive handwriting and perfume. "You have humiliated me in front of people I've known for 20 years, it read. "You've twisted this neighborhood against me. But I promise you, I will not be erased. I will return when you least expect it." Kyle called it a last gasp. "Classic narcissist play," he said. "She's not done. She's regrouping." He was right. That weekend, security footage caught her again. Not breaking in, just standing across the street at 1:17 a.m., staring at my house for 15 minutes before walking away. But this time, I wasn't angry. I was done, because the real justice was already in motion. City officials were involved. The police had an open investigation, and Martha had finally been seen for what she was, a menace wrapped in tennis shoes and entitlement. Now all I had to do was wait. Waiting wasn't easy. Knowing she might do something reckless again, or worse to someone else, left a knot in my chest. But I kept reminding myself, we'd done everything by the book. The evidence was solid, the neighborhood had spoken, and more importantly, Martha was unraveling. The next incident proved that. It was early morning when I heard the shouting, not just loud, furious. I stepped outside and saw Martha in the middle of the street, screaming at a city sanitation worker. "You're on private property," she shrieked, pointing to the sidewalk. "This is HOA mandated ground. You can't just roll in your truck like this." The worker, A guy maybe in his 50s just trying to do his job looked baffled. Ma'am, it's city jurisdiction. We pick up here every Tuesday. Lies, she yelled. I'll have your job. You're in violation of Section 3. A few neighbors came out, phones already recording. Martha spun around, saw the cameras, and stormed back to her house, slamming the door hard enough to rattle windows. The video went viral. Not TikTok viral, but next door viral, which in suburban terms is just as deadly. Within 48 hours, the clip was being shared with captions like, HOA Karen finally melts down, and beware the clipboard. Then came the knock. City code enforcement. Not police this time, actual municipal officials. They walked the street with folders, tablets, and a long checklist. I watched them go from house to house, talking to people, asking questions, collecting complaints. When they reached Martha's door, she didn't answer. They waited 5 minutes, then taped a bright orange notice to her mailbox. Notice of unauthorized enforcement, claims and property trespass, under review. You could practically feel the collective exhale from the block. That evening, I got a call from Officer Morales, the same guy who'd reviewed the garage footage. We've finished reviewing the reports, he said. Her behavior qualifies for misdemeanor trespass, but more than that, she's facing impersonation charges for faking authority. Civil, not criminal, but serious. And the footage? I asked. Already submitted to the review board. We're recommending formal restrictions. I leaned back in my chair, letting it sink in. Martha was officially being dealt with, but poetic justice? That came the following weekend. The HOA, the real HOA, held an emergency meeting. Everyone was invited, including residents from nearby streets who'd had run-ins with Martha in the past. She didn't show, but her name came up over and over, and by the end of the meeting, a motion was passed. Martha Ellison was to be banned from participating in any future HOA positions, official or advisory. They even amended the bylaws to explicitly prohibit self-appointment or enforcement without elected authority. The crowd clapped, and that's when it happened. Kyle stood, pulled out his phone, and played the garage footage on the big monitor. The entry, the confrontation, her stunned face when she saw the deputies. Every second was met with a mixture of laughter, gasps, and low mutters of unbelievable. The final shot, her turning and running, got actual applause, and then silence, until Mr. Henderson, slow but sharp as ever, said, "Well, guess she finally inspected herself right into a corner." Everyone laughed. That was the moment we all knew. She wasn't coming back from this. Her power, her little reign of intimidation, it was done. For good. The final days of Martha's reign didn't come with fireworks. No screaming, no last stand, just silence. A slow, humiliating fade into irrelevance. Her house went dark most evenings, curtains drawn, no clipboard walks, no barking orders at lawn crews or pointing at gutters with her signature accusatory finger. It was like the whole street had been exorcised, but the consequences didn't end with embarrassment. A week after the HOA meeting, a formal letter arrived from the city. It outlined the penalties issued against Martha: a cease and desist for impersonating a municipal or homeowner association official, a misdemeanor citation for unlawful entry with a warning of prosecution if repeated, a fine for unpermitted official notices and unauthorized postings, and a 6-month injunction barring her from initiating any neighbor disputes on pain of civil liability. She was still allowed to live there, of course. Nobody was going to kick her out of her own home. But for someone like Martha, being ignored was worse than being confronted. It was the slow death of control, and she felt it. The final interaction I had with her was strange. I was in the front yard fixing the base of my mailbox when I heard the creak of her gate. I didn't turn around at first. Thought it might be a delivery, but then I heard her voice, not yelling, not righteous. Quiet. "Jeremy," she said. I looked up. She stood at the edge of my property, hair disheveled, face pale. No clipboard, no fake badge. Just a woman who'd finally run out of roles to play. "I wanted to say," she began, then paused. "It was never personal." I blinked. "You broke into my garage." I thought I was protecting the street from pests, from neglect. There were no pests, Martha. I know that now, she whispered, then gave the faintest shrug. Or maybe I always did. We stood in silence for a few seconds. She didn't apologize. Not really, but she looked defeated. Then she turned and walked away. That was the last time I ever spoke to her. Life on Blakewood settled into something new after that. The neighbors, the ones who used to keep to themselves, started talking more. I'd pass by Lena walking her kids and she'd wave instead of rushing inside. Mr. Henderson actually invited me over for a drink on his porch. Funny thing is, all it took was one person standing up and saying, "Enough," not by yelling louder, not by getting petty, but by being calm, prepared, and just refusing to play along anymore. As for the garage, I still keep the camera running, just in case, but mostly now it's where I work on my car, drink a beer, and finally enjoy the peace I was promised when I bought this place. If you're still watching and you've got a Martha in your life, someone who makes you feel small or watched or just plain unwelcome, know this: you don't have to fight dirty to win. You just have to stand your ground and make sure the camera's rolling. Thanks for listening. If this story hit close to home, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your wildest neighbor story in the comments. Because trust me, you're not alone.